At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law whispered to her kids, "Enjoy it. This might be the last one with the wrinkled hag." I served the food in silence. On Monday, I made one call, and she hasn't stopped panicking since. I hadn't meant to overhear Vanessa's words. I was simply bringing in the sweet potato casserole, the one my grandson Tommy loves so much. But as I approached the dining room, I froze, the heavy ceramic dish burning my arthritic fingers. "Enjoy it. This might be the last one with the wrinkled hag." Her voice was low, conspiratorial, as she leaned toward my grandchildren. 12-year-old Emma's eyes widened slightly, but 6-year-old Tommy just reached for his water glass, oblivious to the weight of his mother's words. The wrinkled hag. Me, Martha Sullivan. 70 years old, retired nurse, widow, and apparently a burden to be discarded. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. I stood there, my chest tightening, before I gathered myself and pushed through the swinging door. I placed the casserole on the table with hands that somehow didn't tremble. My son Daniel looked up at me with a smile that didn't reach his tired eyes. "Smells amazing, Mom." I nodded, managing a smile as I took my seat at the far end of the table, the place Vanessa had assigned me when she took over hosting Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Before that, the holiday had been at my house for 30 years, with everyone gathered around my dining room table, the one my late husband James and I had saved for months to buy. "Grandma, can I have extra marshmallows?" Tommy asked, bouncing in his seat. "Of course, sweetheart." I spooned an extra helping onto his plate, aware of Vanessa's tight smile from across the table. "He's had enough sugar today?" she said, sliding the plate slightly away from him. "We need to watch his diet." I nodded again, my face a practiced mask. This was the dance we'd been doing for years. Me trying to be the grandmother I wanted to be, Vanessa establishing her boundaries. I had always respected them, always stepped back when asked. I had thought it was normal mother-in-law and daughter-in-law tension, but wrinkled hag wasn't tension, it was contempt. Throughout dinner, I served the food I'd spent 3 days preparing. The turkey I'd roasted since dawn, the stuffing made from my mother's recipe, the cranberry sauce with orange zest that Daniel had loved since childhood. I refilled water glasses, fetched extra napkins, and listened to Vanessa detail her latest real estate triumph. A luxury condo listing that would finally put them on the map. "Martha, don't you think it's time you considered downsizing?" she asked suddenly, cutting into her turkey with precise movements. "That guest house is really too much for one person to maintain." The guest house. My home for the past 5 years. After James died, Daniel had suggested I sell our house and move into their renovated garden cottage. "It'll be perfect, Mom. You'll be close to the kids, but still have your independence." Independence that had slowly eroded, as Vanessa suggested. Which days I should do laundry to avoid overtaxing the septic system, which hours were best for me to be in the main house with the grandchildren, which foods I should keep in my refrigerator. "I managed just fine," I said quietly, passing the gravy boat to Emma. "I was reading about this wonderful senior community in Lakeside," Vanessa continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "They have activities, outings, medical staff on site. You'd be with people your own age." Daniel cleared his throat. "Vanessa, let's not discuss this today. I'm just thinking about Martha's quality of life," she said, reaching over to pat my hand in a gesture that felt more patronizing than kind. "It must be lonely in that guest house, all by yourself. It wasn't lonely when I had my grandchildren visiting." But those visits had become increasingly rare as Vanessa scheduled endless activities for them. Piano lessons, soccer practice, coding camps. My offers to drive them or help with homework were politely declined. "We've got it covered, Martha. You should rest. Rest." As if I was already in life's waiting room. Later, as I washed dishes, alone, despite my offers to help, I heard Vanessa on the phone in the next room. "Yes, we can list it after the holidays," she was saying. "Once we move her to Lakeside Gardens, we can rent out the guest house. The monthly income will more than cover her care costs with plenty left over." I nearly dropped the gravy boat I was drying. They had already decided. My home, my little refuge, was already being counted as their asset. That night, back in my guest house, I didn't cry. I sat in the darkness looking at the photographs on my mantle. James and me on our wedding day. Daniel's college graduation. My retirement party from Memorial Hospital, surrounded by colleagues who had thrown me a celebration after 35 years of nursing service. I picked up that last photo, studying my younger face. I had been the head nurse of the cardiac unit. I had saved lives. I had trained dozens of younger nurses who still called me for advice years after I retired. Patients had written letters thanking me for my care during their darkest hours. When had I become just a wrinkled hag? I placed the photo back and walked to my desk, where a business card had sat untouched for months. Patricia Morgan, Director of Nursing, Memorial Hospital Foundation. My former colleague, who had called 3 months ago, asking if I'd be interested in volunteering for their senior outreach program. "We need experienced nurses like you, Martha," she had said. "Your knowledge is invaluable." I had declined, explaining that I was busy helping with my grandchildren, the grandchildren who were being systematically kept from me. I looked at the clock. 11:42 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I picked up the card, running my finger over the embossed letters, and placed it by my phone for Monday morning. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of politeness. I declined Sunday dinner at the main house, claiming a headache. Instead, I sorted through old nursing journals and certificates, remembering the woman I had been before I became invisible. On Monday morning, my fingers trembled slightly as I dialed Patricia's number. "Martha Sullivan." Her warm voice brought tears to my eyes. What a wonderful surprise. "That volunteer position," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Is it still available?" "Absolutely," Patricia replied without hesitation. "In fact, we've expanded the program. We're now looking for a part-time coordinator, with your experience." "I'd like to apply," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "Wonderful. Can you come in tomorrow to discuss details?" "And Martha..." Patricia paused. "This position comes with a housing allowance. We've partnered with Sunset Apartments to provide affordable housing for our senior staff and volunteers." I glanced out my window at the main house where Vanessa was already showing a real estate colleague around the property, gesturing toward my guest house. "I'd be very interested in hearing more about that," I said quietly. When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose. The wrinkled hag was about to show her family exactly who she still was. And Vanessa? She hadn't stopped panicking since she saw me walking into Memorial Hospital the following week, arm in arm with Patricia Morgan, who just happened to be on the board of the hospital where my son Daniel was an administrator, a position he'd gotten largely due to my recommendation years ago. Sometimes a single phone call can change everything. But then again, so can a whispered insult at Thanksgiving dinner. Patricia's office hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same mahogany desk, same wall of medical textbooks, same view of the hospital courtyard. What had changed was how I felt sitting across from her. No longer the confident head nurse, but a woman fighting to remember her own worth. "Martha, you look wonderful," Patricia said, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You're..." "Too kind," I replied, smoothing my best blouse, the one I'd ironed twice that morning. "I'm honest, not kind," she corrected, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your credentials are impressive. 35 years in cardiac care, 7 as head nurse, certifications in geriatric care." I felt a flush of pride I hadn't experienced in years. "The senior outreach program needs someone who understands both nursing and the challenges older patients face," Patricia continued. "Someone who can coordinate care with empathy and expertise." "It's been 5 years since I practiced," I admitted. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Your knowledge doesn't evaporate. This is coordination, not direct care. You'd be the bridge between the hospital and seniors in the community." As she detailed the position, I felt something awakening inside me, a sense of competence I'd buried. Patricia mentioned the modest salary, the flexible hours, and then, most importantly, the housing option. Sunset Apartments reserves units for hospital staff. Nothing fancy, but clean, modern, and independent. The complex has a community garden, social activities, and it's 3 blocks from here. "It sounds perfect," I said, meaning it. After touring the outreach offices, we walked through the main hospital corridor. The familiar antiseptic smell, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. It all felt like coming home. "Martha, is that you?" I turned to see Robert Chen, a cardiologist who had been a resident when I was head nurse. "Dr. Chen, how wonderful to see you." "Please, it's Robert now," he said, giving me a warm hug. "Are you coming back to save us all? The cardiac unit hasn't been the same without you." Patricia explained my potential new role, and Robert's face lit up. "Perfect. We need someone who can help our elderly patients navigate the system." As we chatted, I noticed a familiar figure at the end of the hallway. Vanessa, elegantly dressed in her real estate blazer, staring at us with undisguised shock. She was likely here for the hospital fundraising committee she'd recently joined. When she approached, her smile was tight. "Martha, what a surprise." "Vanessa, how nice to see you," I replied calmly. "Do you know Dr. Chen?" "And of course you know Patricia Morgan, our director of nursing." Vanessa's eyes darted between them, clearly calculating the social dynamics. "Mrs. Reynolds," Patricia nodded coolly. "Your fundraising work is appreciated." "Actually, it's Mrs. Sullivan," Vanessa corrected. "Daniel and I kept my father-in-law's name, of course, my late husband's name, James Sullivan, the name that had once been spoken with reverence in this hospital, where he'd been a generous benefactor after his successful triple bypass." "Of course," Patricia said. "James Sullivan was a remarkable man. His donation established our cardiac rehabilitation center. Martha was instrumental in that, weren't you?" I nodded, remembering how James had insisted the donation be anonymous. Only hospital leadership knew the Sullivan Cardiac Rehabilitation Center was named after its actual donor. "Martha, I didn't realize you were visiting the hospital today," Vanessa said. "Is everything all right, health-wise?" "Everything's wonderful," I replied. "I'm discussing a position with the senior outreach program." The flash of alarm in her eyes was unmistakable. "A position? But you're retired." "Semi-retired," Patricia corrected. "And precisely the experienced nurse we need." On the drive home, I couldn't stop smiling. I'd forgotten how it felt to be valued for my skills rather than tolerated for convenience. I could start next week, and I'd submitted an application for a one-bedroom apartment at Sunset. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was already there, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. As I entered my guest house, my phone rang. "Mom? Can you come to the main house? We need to talk." In the kitchen, Daniel and Vanessa sat stiffly at the table. Vanessa's makeup couldn't hide her reddened eyes. "Is everything all right?" I asked, taking a seat. "Vanessa tells me she saw you at the hospital today." Daniel began cautiously. "Yes, I'm taking a position with their senior outreach program." "Mom, are you sure that's wise? At your age? My age?" I raised an eyebrow. "Daniel, I'm 70. Not incapacitated." "Of course not," he backpedaled. "It's just, we worry about you overexerting yourself." "What Daniel means," Vanessa interjected, "is that we had plans. We've been discussing your future care." "My future care," I repeated slowly. "You mean Lakeside Gardens, the senior facility you mentioned at Thanksgiving?" Daniel looked surprised. "You knew about that?" "I overheard discussions," I said carefully. "Then, you understand we only want what's best for you," Vanessa pressed. I looked at my son, my only child, who I'd raised alone after James died when Daniel was just 20. The boy who'd once promised, "I'll always take care of you, Mom, like you," took care of me. "Daniel, do you remember what your father made you promise before he died?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, that was years ago. He made you promise to ensure I would always have a home of my own, that I would never end up in a facility unless medically necessary." "Times change, circumstances change," Vanessa interjected. "No," I said quietly. "What's changed is that my guest house has become valuable real estate. I saw the Airbnb listing, Vanessa." They both froze. "You what?" Daniel asked. "Charming garden cottage, separate entrance, perfect weekend getaway, with pictures of my home, my living room, my kitchen." "You went through my computer?" Vanessa's voice rose. "I didn't need to. Tommy showed me the cool pictures of Grandma's house on your iPad last weekend." Daniel turned to Vanessa, confusion written across his face. "You listed Mom's house already? We agreed to wait, to discuss options first." The betrayal in his voice gave me a small measure of hope. "I was just exploring possibilities," Vanessa said defensively. I stood up, suddenly tired of the charade. "I start my new position on Monday, and I've applied for an apartment at Sunset near the hospital." "Mom, please," Daniel began, but I held up my hand. "The forgotten promise," I said softly. "That's what this is about. Your father would be disappointed, Daniel. Not in you taking care of me, but in you forgetting that I've always been capable of taking care of myself. The weekend after my hospital visit passed in uncomfortable silence. Daniel made brief appearances at my guest house, awkward and uncertain, while Vanessa remained conspicuously absent. The Airbnb listing disappeared. Small victory, but meaningful nonetheless. On Sunday evening, a tentative knock interrupted my packing. "Grandma, can I come in?" Emma stood in the doorway, her lanky 12-year-old frame silhouetted against the fading light. "Of course, sweetheart." I moved a box aside to make room for her on the sofa. Emma surveyed the half-packed living room. "So it's true. You're really leaving." "Just moving to my own apartment," I clarified. "I'll still see you and Tommy. Mom says you're abandoning us because you're having a senior crisis." Her directness made me smile despite the sting. "What do you think?" I asked. Emma considered this, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "I think you seem happier. Like when you helped me with my science project last year. You smiled differently. Perceptive child." She settled beside me, leaning against my shoulder like she used to before Vanessa decided she was too old for cuddles. "I was a nurse for 35 years, I told her. It was more than a job. It was who I was. And now you're going back?" "In a way, I'll be helping older patients navigate the healthcare system." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds important." "It is." I hesitated. Sometimes adults forget who they are. They get so caught up in being someone's parent or grandparent that they forget they're also themselves. Like how Dad only talks about real estate now because of Mom, even though he used to love talking about the hospital out of the mouths of babes. Daniel had once been passionate about healthcare administration, viewing it as a way to help people like his father, who had needed cardiac care. Something like that, I agreed carefully. Emma helped me pack for another hour, asking questions about my nursing days. As she was leaving, she hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you remembered who you are, Grandma." Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I dressed carefully in navy slacks and a cream blouse, adding the pearl earrings James had given me on our 25th anniversary. Professional but approachable, exactly the image the senior outreach coordinator should project. At the hospital, Patricia introduced me to the small team I'd be supervising: 2 social workers, a part-time nurse, and an administrative assistant. The respect in their eyes when Patricia detailed my experience was like oxygen to a flame nearly extinguished. "We're thrilled to have someone with your background," said Melissa, one of the social workers. "Some of our older patients are falling through the cracks." "Not anymore," I promised. By lunchtime, I'd reviewed 3 complex cases and suggested interventions that made Melissa's eyes widen with appreciation. By afternoon, I'd drafted a transportation assistance program that had Patricia nodding enthusiastically. By evening, when I stopped by Sunset Apartments to sign my lease, I felt more alive than I had in years. The apartment was small but perfect, a sunny 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor with a tiny balcony overlooking the community garden. The property manager handed me the keys with a smile. "We're delighted to have a Memorial Hospital staff member joining us. Your apartment will be ready next weekend, Ms. Sullivan." Ms. Sullivan. Not Grandma, not Martha, not Daniel's mother. Ms. Sullivan, professional woman with credentials and experience. I drove back to the guest house with windows down, singing along to the radio like I hadn't done since James was alive. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel was waiting on my small porch, his expression troubled. "Mom," he began as I approached. "Can we talk?" Inside, I offered him tea, a ritual from his childhood when serious conversations were needed. "Vanessa told me about your apartment," he said. "You've already signed a lease?" "Yes. Don't you think you're rushing things?" I stirred honey into my tea, taking my time. "I don't. I think I've been postponing my life for 5 years. Daniel flinched. "Is it that bad living here?" The hurt in his voice tempted me to soften the truth, but we were beyond platitudes. "It's not about good or bad, Daniel. It's about independence, dignity. I've always tried to take care of you, and I appreciate that," I interrupted gently. "But there's a difference between supporting someone and deciding what's best for them without their input." He had the grace to look ashamed. The Lakeside Gardens idea was Vanessa's. She thought it would be easier for everyone. Easier for whom? I asked pointedly. Daniel stared into his tea. "She's been talking about turning this place into a rental. Income property, she calls it. I know. I should have discussed it with you first." "Yes, you should have." We sat in silence until Daniel finally asked, "Will you at least come for Sunday dinners? The kids will miss you." "I'll always make time for my grandchildren," I assured him. "But Daniel, things need to change. I won't be treated like an inconvenience or a babysitter of last resort." After he left, I continued packing, placing each item from my former life into boxes with new purpose. The next morning at the hospital, I was reviewing patient files when a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "Mrs. Sullivan, do you have a moment?" I looked up to find Robert Stevens, the hospital's chief administrator and Daniel's boss, standing there. "Of course, Mr. Stevens. Please come in." He closed the door and took a seat. "Patricia speaks very highly of you. Says you've revolutionized the outreach program in just one day." "That's generous of her. She also mentioned you're Daniel's mother." He leaned forward slightly. "I had no idea. Daniel never mentioned his mother was Martha Sullivan of cardiac care." I wasn't sure where this was going. "Daniel likes to keep his professional and personal lives separate." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Well, the hospital board is pleased to have you. In fact, we're discussing expanding the senior outreach program. With proper funding, it could become a model for other hospitals." "That would be wonderful," I said cautiously. "We're having a fundraising gala next month. I'd like you to speak about the program. Your experience would lend significant credibility." As I walked to the cafeteria later, I spotted Vanessa coming out of a meeting room with the hospital fundraising committee. Her step faltered when she saw me, but she quickly composed herself, approaching with a practiced smile. "Martha, Daniel mentioned you started your new position." "Yes, it's been wonderful reconnecting with the medical community," I replied pleasantly. "How nice. I suppose it gives you something to do." I met her gaze steadily. "It gives me purpose. Vanessa, and apparently some influence. Mr. Stevens has asked me to speak at next month's gala." Her smile froze. The gala was Vanessa's pet project, her chance to network with the hospital's wealthiest donors and board members. "That's surprising," she managed. "Is it? I was head nurse here for 7 years. Many of the board members were my colleagues." I smiled gently. "By the way, how is the fundraising committee going? I understand your application for chairperson is pending." The following weeks brought a transformation I hadn't anticipated. Each morning I woke with purpose, dressed with care, and drove to the hospital where people knew my name, my real name, not just Daniel's mother or the children's grandmother. The outreach program flourished under my guidance, with 3 new initiatives launched and a growing list of elderly patients receiving coordinated care. I moved into my apartment at sunset the weekend after signing the lease. Daniel helped carry boxes, his movement stiff, his conversation stilted. Vanessa didn't come, claiming a last-minute property showing. "It's nice," he admitted reluctantly, surveying my new living room with its large windows and view of the garden. "Smaller than the guest house, but mine," I finished for him. "Completely mine." A shadow crossed his face. "Mom, I never meant to make you feel unwelcome." I touched his arm gently. "I know, Daniel. But sometimes what we intend and what we do are different things." Tommy and Emma visited that afternoon, Emma helping me arrange my books while Tommy excitedly claimed the small second bedroom as his sleepover room. "Can we come stay next weekend?" Tommy asked, bouncing on the daybed I'd purchased specifically for grandchild visits. "If it's all right with your parents," I hedged, knowing what the answer would likely be. Sure enough, when Daniel picked them up, Vanessa called moments later. "Martha, we need to establish some boundaries," she began without preamble. "The children can't be making plans without consulting us first." "They're excited about the new apartment," I said mildly. "I told them they needed your permission." "Well, next weekend won't work. Emma has dance and Tommy has soccer." Her voice was clipped. "Maybe in a few weeks once you're settled." I recognized the delaying tactic. "Of course, Vanessa. Whatever works for your schedule." 2 days later, Patricia called me into her office, her expression unusually serious. "Martha, there's something you should know." She closed the door behind me. "The hospital board received a letter expressing concerns about your position." My stomach tightened. "What kind of concerns?" "Questions about whether someone your age can handle the demands of the role, suggesting we might face liability issues." She shook her head in disgust. "Completely unfounded, of course. But I thought you should be aware." "Do you know who sent it?" Patricia's lips thinned. "It was anonymous, but it mentioned specific details about your family situation that few people would know." I didn't need to ask further. Vanessa's fingerprints were all over this. "What happens now?" I asked. "Nothing." Robert Stevens dismissed it immediately. In fact, he was furious that someone would attempt to undermine our newest program director. Patricia smiled. If anything, it strengthened the board's support for you. That evening, I received a text from Daniel asking if I was free for lunch the next day. We met at a small cafe halfway between our workplaces. How's the new apartment? He asked after we ordered. Wonderful. I've joined the garden club and met several neighbors. Daniel nodded, pushing his salad around his plate. And the job? Going well? Very well, though there have been challenges. His gaze flickered up. What kind of challenges? I considered how much to share. Someone sent an anonymous letter to the board questioning my capability due to my age. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. What? Who would do that? I was hoping you might have some insight. I kept my voice neutral, watching his reaction. His face flushed, then paled. You think Vanessa did this? It wasn't a question. I stayed silent, letting him reach his own conclusions. Mom, I know things have been difficult, but Vanessa wouldn't. Daniel, I interrupted gently. Let's not pretend. The letter mentioned details about my family situation. He rubbed his forehead, looking suddenly exhausted. I'll talk to her. That's not why I told you. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. I want you to understand what I'm dealing with. Daniel looked genuinely distressed. I had no idea things had gone this far. Our conversation was interrupted by his phone ringing. Vanessa. He declined the call, something I'd never seen him do before. Things aren't good at home, he admitted quietly. Since you moved out, since the Airbnb situation, we've been arguing more. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, Daniel was my son, and I wanted him to be happy. She thinks I'm choosing you over her. He laughed humorlessly. As if it has to be a choice. Doesn't it? I asked softly. Hasn't it been for years? The question hung between us, unanswered. That Friday, I was meeting with a particularly challenging patient when my assistant knocked on my door. Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Stevens would like to see you when you're finished. In Robert's office, I found him reviewing a thick document, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Martha, thank you for coming. Please sit. He removed his glasses, setting them aside. I'll get right to the point. The hospital has received a significant donation earmarked specifically for the senior outreach program. That's wonderful. News, I said, genuinely pleased. Yes, but there's more. The donor has a specific request. Robert leaned forward. They want the program expanded to include a residential component, affordable housing for seniors with ongoing medical needs, and they want you to oversee its development. I blinked, stunned. That's a significant expansion. Who is the donor? Robert smiled. That's the interesting part. The Sullivan Foundation. The what? I felt dizzy suddenly. There was no Sullivan Foundation that I knew of. Apparently, your late husband established a trust before his death. It's been managed by his attorneys. All these years, growing substantially, the conditions of the trust specified that the funds would be released for healthcare initiatives when certain requirements were met. My mind raced. James had never mentioned this, but then James had always been planning ahead, always thinking of how to protect me, provide for me. What requirements? I asked. That's not entirely clear to me. The attorneys reached out after seeing a piece about you in the hospital newsletter. They said you've fulfilled the conditions by returning to healthcare work. I sat back, overwhelmed. James, still taking care of me all these years later. There's one more thing, Martha, Robert continued. The proposed residential facility needs a location. The board is considering several properties, including one that was recently brought to our attention, a large home with a separate guest house on Cedar Lane. My heart stopped. Daniel and Vanessa's property, my former home. The owner, apparently, indicated they might be interested in selling, Robert continued, oblivious to my shock. Perfect location, close to the hospital, residential zoning already in place. Who approached you about this property? I managed to ask. Daniel Sullivan? Robert looked confused. Your son. I assumed you knew. I sat in Robert Stevens' office, struggling to process his words. Daniel was considering selling their home, the very property Vanessa had been so possessive of, the one with the guest house she had tried to take from me. Martha? Robert's voice pulled me back to the present. I didn't mean to surprise you. I assumed Daniel had discussed this with you. No, I managed. He hadn't mentioned it. Robert looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry. Family dynamics can be complicated. but from a purely practical standpoint, the property would be ideal for our purposes. Close to the hospital, large enough for several residential units. When did Daniel approach you about this? I asked, working to keep my voice steady. Steady. Yesterday, Robert shuffled some papers on his desk. He said he'd been reconsidering his family's living situation. Something about a fresh start. A fresh start. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just weeks ago, they had been planning to ship me off to Lakeside Gardens while turning my home into a rental property. Now Daniel was talking about selling altogether. I should speak with my son, I said, rising from my chair. Of course. Robert stood as well. And Martha, regardless of what happens with the property, the position overseeing the residential component is yours if you want it. The Sullivan Foundation was quite specific about that. I nodded, still reeling from the revelation about James's trust. All these years, I'd thought I was alone. But James had been looking out for me from beyond the grave, creating a safety net I never knew existed. I tried calling Daniel on my drive home, but the call went to voicemail. When I reached my apartment, I found Emma sitting on the floor outside my door, her knees pulled up to her chest. Emma? I rushed forward. Sweetheart, what are you doing here? How did you get here? I took the bus. Her voice was small, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Mom and Dad are fighting again. About the house, about you, about everything. I unlocked my door and ushered her inside, my heart pounding. Your parents don't know you're here, do they? She shook her head, dropping her backpack on my sofa. Dad's at work. Mom was on the phone with her real estate partner talking about listings and market values. Nobody was paying attention to me anyway. I pulled out my phone. Emma, I have to call them. They must be worried sick. Mom won't even notice I'm gone until dinner, she said bitterly. Despite her protest, I called Daniel's cell. No answer. Then, Vanessa's, it rang several times before she picked up. Martha? I'm in the middle of something. Emma is with me, I interrupted. At my apartment. A pause, then. What? How did she took the bus. She says you and Daniel have been arguing. Vanessa's voice turned cold. So she ran to Grandma. How convenient. Put her on the phone. Vanessa, she's upset. Maybe we should put her on the phone, Martha. I handed the phone to Emma, who listened for a moment before her face crumpled. But Mom... She fell silent, listening again. Fine, whatever. She thrust the phone back at me. I'll come get her, Vanessa said tersely. Text me your address. I can bring her home, I offered. No, the single word was sharp as a slap. I'll be there in 30 minutes. While we waited, I made Emma a mug of hot chocolate and sat beside her on the sofa. Want to talk about it? She shrugged, staring into her mug. Dad says we might move. Mom doesn't want to. They think I can't hear them arguing, but the walls aren't that thick. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults have different ideas about what's best for the family. Is it true? Emma looked up at me. Are we selling our house because of you? The question caught me off guard. Because of me? What makes you think that? Mom said it's your fault, that you're trying to take our house away for some old people program. I sighed, understanding now why Vanessa was so upset. Emma, that's not true. I only learned about your Dad considering selling the house today. It was as much a surprise to me as it is to you. Then why is he doing it? I don't know, sweetheart. You'll have to ask your dad. When Vanessa arrived, her face was a mask of controlled anger. She barely looked at me as she ushered Emma toward the door. Vanessa, I said quietly. We should talk. Not now, Martha. Her voice was ice. Yes, now. I stood my ground. Emma took a bus across town because she's upset about what's happening at home. This isn't about you and me anymore. It's affecting the children. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. Fine, but not here. Family meeting, tonight, 7 o'clock. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment, trying to make sense of it all. The Sullivan Foundation, Daniel's decision to sell the house, Vanessa's accusation that I was somehow behind it, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. I called the one person who might have answers. Martha? Patricia sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything all right? Did you know about the Sullivan Foundation? I asked without preamble. Pause. Yes, James set it up before he died. He made me promise not to tell you unless certain conditions were met. What conditions? That you would reclaim your professional identity, that you would stand on your own. He believed in you, Martha. He knew what you were capable of, even when you doubted yourself. My eyes filled with tears. Why didn't he tell me? He was afraid you'd never push yourself if you knew there was a safety net. He wanted you to discover your own strength. At 7 o'clock sharp, I stood on the doorstep of the house I once shared with Daniel's family, the home I had been gradually excluded from, culminating in that whispered insult at Thanksgiving, the wrinkled hag. Daniel opened the door, his expression a mixture of relief and trepidation. Mom, thanks for coming. In the living room, Vanessa sat rigidly on the sofa, while Emma and Tommy were nowhere to be seen. The children are at my mother's, Vanessa said, noting my glance around the room. This conversation isn't for them. I agree. I took a seat in the armchair across from them. So, I understand you're considering selling the house, Daniel. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. It's been on my mind for a while now. Since when? Vanessa's voice was sharp. You never mentioned it until your mother moved out. That's not true, Vanessa. I brought it up last year when you were talking about renovating the kitchen. You said it wasn't the right time. And now suddenly it is? Right when your mother's hospital is looking for property? I held up a hand. Let me be clear. I had no idea Daniel was considering selling until Robert Stevens told me today. This wasn't my idea. Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes troubled. It wasn't about you, Mom, not directly. But after everything that happened, the Airbnb listing, Thanksgiving, the way we've treated you, I started questioning a lot of things. Like, what? Vanessa demanded. Like whether this house, this life we've built, is really making any of us happy. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. We're so focused on appearances, on what other people think, that we've forgotten what matters. What matters is our family, Vanessa insisted. Our children having stability. Our family includes my mother, Daniel countered. And we haven't treated her like family. We've treated her like an inconvenience. The silence that followed Daniel's words was deafening. Vanessa stared at him as if he'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. I sat very still, afraid to break the moment when my son had finally spoken the truth that had been buried for years. An inconvenience? Vanessa finally managed, her voice tight. We gave her a place to live. We included her in family events. We tolerated her, Daniel interrupted. We kept her at arm's length. We made decisions about her life without consulting her. And you... He turned to face his wife directly. You called her a wrinkled hag at Thanksgiving. I felt my breath catch. He knew. All this time, he had known. Vanessa's face drained of color. You heard that? No. Tommy did. He asked me what it meant. He didn't understand why you'd say something so cruel about his grandmother. Vanessa's eyes darted to me, then back to Daniel. It was a momentary lapse. I was stressed about hosting. It wasn't momentary, Daniel said quietly. It was the truth slipping out. How you really feel. And I let it happen. I let you push my mother to the margins of our family because it was easier than standing up to you. I found my voice at last. Daniel, this isn't just about me. But it is, Mom. He looked at me, his eyes full of regret. It's about how we've treated you, yes, but it's also about what that treatment says about us. About me. What kind of son lets his mother be disrespected in his own home? What kind of father lets his children see that it's acceptable to dismiss the elderly as burdens? Vanessa stood abruptly. I will not be vilified in my own home. You're twisting everything to make me the villain. I'm not making you anything, Daniel replied evenly. I'm just finally seeing clearly. The tension was unbearable. I stood up, smoothing my slacks with hands that barely trembled. Perhaps we should continue this another time when emotions aren't so high. No, Daniel said firmly. We need to resolve this. All of it. He turned to Vanessa. I've accepted a position at Memorial's new satellite clinic in Riverside. It's a 30-minute commute, but it comes with a significant promotion. Vanessa blinked, clearly blindsided by this news. You what? When did this happen? Last week. I was going to tell you, but you were so upset about the fundraising committee chairperson position going to Patricia Morgan that I waited. Vanessa's lips thinned at the mention of Patricia, a reminder of yet another defeat in her social climbing efforts. The promotion means we can afford a new start, Daniel continued. A smaller house, closer to the children's schools, something more manageable. And this property? I asked softly. You're serious about selling it to the hospital? Daniel nodded. The Sullivan Foundation's offer is more than fair, and knowing the house and guest house will help seniors who need care. It feels right, Mom. Like something Dad would have wanted. Something James would have wanted. The thought brought tears to my eyes. All those years ago, when he made Daniel promise to ensure I always had a home of my own, he hadn't just been thinking of my physical needs. He'd been trying to protect my dignity, my independence. I don't understand, Vanessa said, her voice wavering. Why wasn't I consulted about any of this? The job, the house, you've been making all these decisions behind my back. The way we made decisions about my mother's life behind her back? Daniel asked pointedly. Vanessa sank back onto the sofa, the fight seemingly draining out of her. This isn't fair. No, I said softly. It wasn't fair. Any of it. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw something other than disdain or calculation. In Vanessa's gaze, I saw fear of losing control, of losing status, of losing the carefully constructed image she had built. The children love this house, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The children love their grandmother, Daniel countered. They were devastated when she moved out. Emma ran away to find her today. Doesn't that tell you something? Vanessa looked away, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I felt a surprising pang of empathy. For all her flaws, Vanessa was struggling with the same fear that had driven me for years, the fear of becoming irrelevant. Nothing has to be decided tonight, I said, my voice gentler than I had intended. But Daniel's right about one thing. We need to think about what example we're setting for Emma and Tommy. Vanessa wiped her cheek quickly. Fine. We'll discuss options. It wasn't a surrender, but it was a beginning. 1 year later, I stood in the sunny common room of the Sullivan senior residence, watching as the last of the decorations were hung for the grand opening ceremony. The former guest house, now expanded and renovated, gleamed with fresh paint and new furnishings. The main house had been converted into administrative offices and community spaces, while 6 new cottages had been built on the expansive property. Everything looks perfect, Ms. Sullivan, said Maya, one of the social workers on my expanded team. The first residents move in next week, right? Yes, and we already have a waiting list. I couldn't keep the pride from my voice. The program had exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. The sound of running feet made me turn just as Tommy barreled into the room, followed by a more dignified Emma. Grandma! Dad says the cake is here and it's huge. Tommy's enthusiasm made me laugh. Emma rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. It's not that big, but it does have the Sullivan Residence logo on it, which is pretty cool. Daniel appeared in the doorway, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. The move to a smaller house, the new position at the satellite clinic, these changes had been good for him. For all of them, really. Mom, the board members are starting to arrive, he said. Robert Stevens was asking for you. I'll be right there. I straightened my blazer and smoothed my hair, now fully silver and worn in a stylish bob that, according to Emma, made me look distinguished. As I made my way to the entrance, I passed the memorial plaque honoring James Sullivan, whose foundation had made the residence possible. I touched it briefly, a silent thank you to the man who had believed in me even when I had stopped believing in myself. Outside on the freshly laid patio, chairs had been arranged for the ceremony. Patricia was there, of course, along with Robert Stevens and the hospital board. Daniel stood with his colleagues from the clinic. Tommy and Emma had taken seats in the front row, saving one between them for me. And at the edge of the gathering, slightly apart but present nonetheless, stood Vanessa. Our relationship remained complicated. The events of that family meeting a year ago had started a painful but necessary evolution. She and Daniel had entered counseling. She had reluctantly apologized for her treatment of me. Small steps, imperfect progress. When she saw me looking her way, she nodded once, a gesture somewhere between acknowledgement and respect. I nodded back, then took my place at the podium. Welcome to the grand opening of the Sullivan Senior Residence, I began, my voice strong and clear. Today marks not just the beginning of a new healthcare initiative, but a celebration of second chances. As I spoke about the residence's mission, about dignity and independence in aging, my gaze swept over the gathered faces. My professional colleagues who valued my expertise, my son who had found his voice, my grandchildren who saw me as a person, not just a grandmother, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer the wrinkled hag someone had whispered about at Thanksgiving dinner. I was Martha Sullivan, nurse, director, grandmother, survivor, visible, respected, whole. Sometimes, a single call can change everything. But then again, so can a whispered insult at Thanksgiving dinner.